Welcome back to Soft Spoken Story Time, Episode 7, continuing on with Ouroboros, Chapter 4, Step 001/09, Open File, 05-9, The Outsider. Adult female of Maori descent, appears to be in her late 30s, the only current member of the council believed to be recruited from outside the Foundation. Despite some irregularities, bears a striking resemblance to Donna Wetu Taylor, a noted geologist who apparently took her own life in 1985 after a massive scandal involving severe academic misconduct was revealed, professionally ruining her credibility and involving her in a number of lawsuits for fraud and the misuse of public funding. Due to her scientific background, 059 is perhaps the most focused research mind on the Council. She maintains several major projects at any point in time, several of which have gone on to produce technology used by the Foundation in major applications such as the Cant counter. One of the more secretive members of the Council, the Outsider is rarely seen outside of Overwatch Command. Notably, her inclusion on the Council is a point of issue with several other members, who see her as needlessly short-sighted. Decryption complete. Access log. Chapter 5, A Life Unlived. Then. Aaron Siegel sat in the back room of a bustling Somali warehouse. Through the cracks in the blinds, he could see people moving to and fro, the first faint breaths of their new insurgency. He thought the name was ridiculous. Most of them did, but ridiculous was part of the equation. Make them believe you're incompetent. Make them think it's not an act. Their footprint was small, but growing steadily. Already they had raided 3 Foundation storehouses in Africa, with another team preparing for a third. Make them think it's not an act. But Aaron Siegel sat uncomfortably. The week before, they got word that work had begun on a new facility in Italy. There wasn't a sign on the door identifying it as a Foundation site, but all the signs were there. At the same time, 3 new unmarked ships were seen patrolling the waters near their Somali headquarters. Reports of task forces being deployed in the United States, dark planes over the Antarctic. He sat uncomfortably because these were not the choked final breaths of a dying organization. Frederick Williams was dead, annihilated by the finger of God himself. Most of the 05 research team, the senior leadership of the fledgling Foundation, had either been killed in the ensuing chaos or defected along with Aaron and Arians. Many others had left their posts to join them too, for any number of ideological reasons, the Chaos Insurgency. Yet even in the midst of their greatest defeat, the Foundation continued on. Their operations seemed untouched, and Aaron Siegel sat uncomfortably. The telephone on his desk rang out its piercing notice, and Aaron moved to answer it. He hesitated. The phone had only ever seemed to want to bring him bad news. Another shipment lost, Foundation sites increasing security, more sites under construction. Everything they had sacrificed, everything he had given up, would be for nothing if the Foundation and its efforts were not ground to a halt. The fear of failure, of the reckoning of his sins, stayed his hand for a moment. But Aaron Siegel answered the phone. "Can you hear the black wolf howl at the moon?" said Arians, his rough tenor barely audible across their meager connection. "Vincent," Aaron sighed in relief. His friend's voice was a welcome reprieve, even in spite of its tone. "You're well?" "I've told you 1,000 times," Arians growled over the receiver. "Finish the phrase. It's a security measure. We cannot be compromised, especially not now." Aaron's heart dropped slightly. "What news?" Arians paused. "They're moving to South America. The Broken God fanatics are involved in some activity there. The Foundation is shipping out en masse." "How many?" Aaron felt himself ask. 200, maybe 300 men, Arian said, and that's not including some other staff members they're moving in from the other sites in the region. It's a full-on escalation, Aaron. Aaron sunk into his seat. The receiver of the phone felt heavy in his hand, and he heard a distant cackling that swept over him in waves. How could this be happening? They should be in ruins. "Aaron?" Arian's voice shocked him and brought him back to reality with a start. Yes, sorry. Vince, how is this happening? What did we do wrong? Arians was quiet for a moment. Maybe Sophia was just more resourceful than we anticipated. Look, Aaron, all I know is what we're being told. And what we're being told is that the Foundation is mobilizing to Mexico. We need to have boots on the ground there to try and disrupt their supply lines. Aaron nodded slowly to nobody but himself. Yes, you're right, of course. We'll arrange transports for our agents in the region as soon as possible. Vince, he began to say, hesitating. Yes? I think I want to go with you on this one. I want to go to San Marco. Why? Aaron's eyes descended on his desk. Sitting on the middle of it, tied up with a red thread, was a small roll of paper. I want to see them. I just need to see them again. They're not there. We've already had our agents in the area confirm that. Just humor me, Vince. I'll leave Felix in charge. He can handle things here while we're away. I won't be gone more than 2 weeks. Aaron could hear Arian's discontentedness across the continent. Fine. You stay with me in my detachment, and you don't get too close to whatever is happening in La Paz. Aaron agreed and then hung up the phone. That night, Aaron Siegel dreamed many dreams. He's standing next to Frederick Williams as they open the doors to a building labeled Site 17 on its door. He can see Arians beside him, beaming. He receives a report of and categorizes a strange statue discovered in an ancient South American ruin. He's there when the truck containing it rolls past the gate. He can faintly see red and green paint. He speaks to Sophia Light, who is taken to calling herself Sophia Nazarene, at a seminar hosted by Williams. She exudes confidence, and when she touches him on the arm, he feels his hair standing up. He asks her about the scars on her wrists. She doesn't answer. He is standing with Frederick Williams and the rest of the Omega-5 research team. They pass around a glass of water, each taking a drink. Arians laughs. Aaron says, I bet you could live forever if you drank this stuff every day. He notices Sophia stuffing a vial of the water into a bag. The next morning he wakes up without aches for the first time in a decade. He is standing in a dark room. 20 paces away, he can see the stark, affixed face of Frederick Williams, illuminated by a thin, glowing purple line in front of him. He's pulling on it with one finger. Every time he touches the line, the moon in the sky outside the window vanishes in a wink. Aaron Siegel calls to him, but he doesn't look away. His eyes are black. He is bleeding. He staggers against the wall, his hand clutching his side. He looks behind him and sees a man laying dead on the ground, his hand clasped around a bloody, shattered golden sword. In the distance, a phone is ringing. He descends down an elevator. It feels like it goes on forever. A phone is ringing. Now. A gentle drizzle created an ambiance of soft pits and pats on the roof of the estate. The long, empty halls echoed the sound like constant, quiet thunder. One wing of the manor, long since buried and fallen into disarray, was naked to the elements, its furnishings ruined by looters or exposure. Standing in the doorway was a woman with lightly tanned skin and black hair that ran down her back. She stared out across the wreckage, unmoving. Her hand lingered for a moment over a picture frame, shattered on a long, scorched-end table. The glass had bubbled and cracked, and the frame was blackened with soot, but the smiling faces of the image's subjects still beamed through. She brushed away the ashes and picked away the errant pieces of glass, and pulled the photo out. Her tears mixed with the rain that soaked her skin. I know you're there, she said quietly, to nobody in particular. You can come out now. Calvin emerged slowly from the shadows behind her, and Anthony from another corner. She didn't turn to see them. I'm probably not who you're looking for, huh? She said, wiping her cheek with the back of her sleeve. No, you're not, Calvin said. She nodded. Whoever held my, she gestured up and down on herself, position before it was given to me, ran afoul of the consensus. She turned towards him, the picture in her hand clutched to her chest. So I became the 9th overseer. Who are you? Anthony said. She smiled. At one point, my name was Donna Taylor. I was a geologist. I took over for, I don't know who, to be honest. But needless to say, the Foundation offered me something I needed very much at the time, and I didn't know better. She looked down at the picture. Quite the coincidence, don't you think? They didn't respond. She continued. I didn't seem to notice. I was glad to be employed, and the things they told me worked beyond my wildest dreams. I didn't realize. It doesn't matter. I'm sorry. I've been thinking about this a lot these past few weeks. I knew my day would come here before too long. You know why I'm here, Calvin said. It wasn't a question. She nodded again, wiping more tears from her eyes. Yes, I do. I understand, I think. I don't agree with you, but I think I would see it different from your point of view. She panned her eyes around behind him. I thought there would be more of you. They're following a lead, Anthony said, slowly drawing his sidearm, looking for the 8th. She winced slightly. They aren't going to have much trouble. He nodded. She looked at the gun in his hand. You don't have to do that. I don't want to go that way. She reached into her pocket and with the flick of her wrist produced a switchblade. She held it out in front of her, her eyes fixed on the blade's edge. At one point I used to think that serving a higher cause would immortalize you, she said. I thought that maybe a life given in service to something greater than yourself would make your death somehow more meaningful. She laughed, tears freely streaming down her face. It doesn't really matter where you end up, though. Any death can be meaningless. Any life can be wasted. Suddenly she locked eyes with Calvin, and he felt an intensity surge through his body like nothing he'd ever felt before. The gun in his hand trembled, and the hairs on the back of his arms stood up. In his mind's eye, he saw the manor around him restored, its halls filled with magnificence and its rooms full of laughter. He saw a father and his daughters fishing at the lake behind the house, and 2 boys wrestling over a toy nearby. He saw Christmases and happy faces and long night hours of studying over immense textbooks. He saw Donna Taylor and her loving parents beaming towards a photographer after earning her doctorate. Then he saw fire and heard screaming, and then he saw her standing in front of him again. She was older now, he noticed. Her posture was slanted and her hair was thinner. With every breath she drew, he could see the years weighing on her. But her eyes scorched the air around them with their intensity, and he could see the last desperate clarion call of a life unlived. He felt anger and hate building inside of him, so much that he might suffocate in it, his entirety overcome by unbridled emotion. He gasped and stumbled as his vision grew blurry, as the pain in his chest split his skin and collapsed his veins. His heart groaned against the strain until it too caught fire and burst, and he was enveloped in flames. And then she was standing in front of him again, her eyes dark. Calvin looked himself over, trembling in relief that he was unharmed. Anthony was grimacing from across the room. When Calvin looked up, he saw that the overseer had collapsed into a burnt chair, and long streams of red were cascading down her wrists. She smiled weakly, her breath ragged and airy. He holstered his gun and walked slowly towards her, careful to avoid the blood-stained knife on the ground. As he approached, she raised one pale arm towards him and handed him the picture in her hand. He took it and she relaxed. Why? Calvin asked. She shrugged. It doesn't matter. She coughed. Her eyes, hazy now and struggling to focus, caught his. Are you afraid of death? He paused. No. She grinned at him, her eyes closing as her consciousness began to drift away. She put one hand on his face, droplets of blood smearing across his cheek. You're lying, she said, and then she died. Back. Journal entry, the 9th Overseer. The 9th Overseer. Unlike many of the other individuals I've described in this journal, there's perhaps the most information available on the 9th Overseer, the one often called the Outsider. She is called the Outsider because unlike the other Overseers and many other individuals in the Foundation, she was not recruited from within, but rather was chosen to replace the previous 059 as a civilian. Who the previous 059 was, or what they did to earn the ire of the council, is unknown. The end result was a vacancy on the council and a seat to fill. The selection process, I am told, was given over to 057, Green, who promptly narrowed the selection down to a handful of candidates. Donna Watu Taylor was one of the names on that list. She was an Australian geologist who had very recently been discredited academically in order to prevent her research, which has unintentionally discovered a powerful gravitational anomaly, from being released to the public. Taylor's name on that list no doubt caused some considerable distress to a handful of other council members, because without exception, all of the information I've gotten about 059 states that her appointment was contentious, and that's it, full stop. I know she's been involved in several higher-level technical projects within the Foundation, but the fact that an outsider was appointed to the council was so grossly overshadowed all of her contributions elsewhere that she seems to simply serve as a means to piss off half the council. Notably, one of 059's greatest opponents was the archivist, who apparently so vehemently opposed the decision that she threatened to quit the council wholesale, and had to be convinced by Green and the ambassador to stand down. The source I spoke to about this incident informed me that whatever means that those two used to get the archivist to step back from the edge changed her considerably, and that afterwards she was even more paranoid and withdrawn than usual. Beyond that, there's really little else to say about her. She should not be especially difficult to find. Several sources have seen her in and around the Australian town where her family home was, although it notably burned to the ground shortly after her appointment. Whether this was intentional or not should not surprise anyone. Back. Step 001/08. Open file. 058. The Lesser. Caucasian male. Age unknown. Possibly former American industrialist Baron Lehman Hoadley, who was believed dead after a train owned by his company, the B.G. Hoadley Group, later acquired by Curvier International, derailed, killing nearly everyone on board. According to many sources, 058 originally held a significant amount of control on the early council, due in no small part to the massive financial holdings he had access to through his brother Garrison Hoadley. After his brother's death and the sale of his company, his authority diminished considerably, and he was eventually ousted as the de facto leader of the council in favor of 057. In the time since, he has maintained his council vote, but his influence is all but non-existent. Supposedly became obsessed later in life with modifying his body and soul with anomalous technology and artifacts. Paranoid. Obsessed with the idea that the other council members will want to kill him. Decryption complete. Access log. Chapter 6. The Coward in the Castle. Then. A phone is ringing. Aaron Siegel stands outside of a church, its walls rotted and crumbling, strained to hold up the towering, pockmarked roof above it. One of the doors hangs loose on a single hinge, swaying softly in the wind. The windows, long since stripped of their panes and frames, whistle an eerie song as the wind slices through them. The entire structure creaks and groans. A phone is ringing. Aaron looks behind him. He can see Arian standing next to their car, watching him. Between the haze of the dust and the settling sun, he almost looks like a mirage. He's too far away, and Aaron can't make out his features. All he sees is his friend's coat, whipping in the wind, and the dark glasses on his face. A phone is ringing. Aaron looks off in the distance and sees fire. He hears the moaning and screeching of metal on metal, and sees smoke rising over the mountains. Every so often he hears the thunderous cacophony of an explosion rip across the Badlands, and sees lights flashing across the horizon. He sees, very briefly, a clockwork mountain, illuminated by an inferno. He sees, very briefly, a clockwork mountain, illuminated by an inferno. A dark star hangs low in the sky. A phone is ringing. Aaron hears voices, 9 voices calling to him from the earth. They know. They know he carries the trigger and they ache for its release. They cry out to him, begging him for the elation of their own torment. They cannot hear each other, but they can hear him. Each footstep sends their tiny bodies writhing in their concrete tombs, their broken arms outstretched, grasping towards a god they cannot see. Come back, they say. Make us whole again. A phone is ringing. Aaron steps towards the church, but his gait is unsure and his pace wavers. Inside the church, he will find the truth. The sky burns bright in the light of a blighted god. Horror seeps through the soil, wrapping tiny shredded fingers around his shoes. He pulls away and struggles toward the church. The sun sinks below the mountains, and as it does, he sees a red right hand hanging in the heavens. The wind knocks the doors of the church wide, and from within its ruined hall, he hears the sound of a man laughing. Inside the church, a phone is ringing. Now, this is it, Olivia said. Calvin consulted the journal. The location was right, so far as he could tell, but the smoking ruin they had come upon was not the fortress described in the text. Shielding his eyes from the sun, he tried to make out some features noted by the author, but was unable to. As a whole, it was an unrecognizable mess. Yeah, Calvin said slowly. This is it. Adam squinted through the smoke that drifted towards them. You think somebody else got here first? Anthony grunted. Likely not. I can't imagine the overseers have made it public that the contract is broken. One of ours, then? The young man inquired. Calvin shook his head. Delta was very specific. Nobody but us. Well, shit then, kids, Olivia said, taking off down the rocky hill. Let's go have a look. The 4 of them followed the road down towards a gatehouse that sat nearly a half-mile off of the destroyed fortress on the mountain. Aside from the drifting smoke and debris being kicked up in the wind, there was no other movement in the entire complex. The gate stood open, and they passed through. The gatehouse sat unoccupied. Little on the nose, don't you think? Adam said, examining the structure as they walked up the long drive towards it. Evil organization boss has an evil fortress in the mountains? Anthony barked out a laugh. You haven't met Baron Hoadley, then? Baron Hoadley? Olivia asked. 058. He didn't build this fortress because he wanted to intimidate people. He built it because he's a coward. You knew him? Adam asked. Anthony hesitated for a moment. Knew of him, sure. I've never met him. A reputation can follow you, though, regardless of what circles you run in. They carried on, though Olivia studied Anthony closely as they did. The damage to the exterior of the mountain fortress was only an appetizer compared to the feast of destruction within. Staircases were broken and inaccessible. The floor beneath them creaked and groaned, and in some places gave way entirely to soot and ash. Long steel beams across the ceiling sagged from the heat, and the entire estate stunk of fire and flesh. Every so often they would pass by a corpse of some man, likely a personal guard of the overseer, their bodies charred and their faces mutilated. Several of them were piled against the inside of a locked door. More lay flat on the ground, running from something in the rear of the building. They descended the levels they could, until they reached a large room whose walls seemed to no longer exist. The roof above it had long since collapsed, and smoke still floated out into the evening sky. There were guards in this room, too, though most of them were now superimposed against the walls. Nothing more than the absence of a man where the heat couldn't reach. They crossed the chamber, careful to avoid the corpses, the point from which the devastation burst forth. It was the corpse of a man. His body flayed open and his skin blackened. Something dull and metallic was anchored into his exposed spine, and as they approached they could hear a gentle whirring of spinning gears. From within his chest grew a massive, scorched, flesh-covered spire that branched out in all directions toward the ceiling. Anthony stooped down to study the figure. "Yep," he said. "That's definitely the overseer." "What the heck happened here, then?" Adam said, incredulous. "If I had to take a guess," Anthony said, standing back up, "I think that Walter had enjoyed the benefits of some sort of augmentations or magic or something unnatural, which were kept in check because he couldn't die." He glanced around the room. "Judging by how far down the fires burned, I'd guess that a few weeks ago he suddenly found himself very mortal and his augmentations didn't agree with each other." He poked the spinning gear mechanism with his foot, causing it to spin a little faster. "Yeah, definitely didn't agree with each other." Olivia peered down at the corpse. "That's it, then? One more down?" Calvin nodded as he surveyed the scene. "Everything here looks more or less self-contained. I guess we're finished here." He glanced at his watch. "It's going to be late soon. Let's find somewhere to bunk down and we'll leave in the morning." "So, we're standing alone on a beach and our evac is 5 minutes away," Calvin growled, his voice hushed as he gestured a spinning helicopter. "We've got peacekeepers on the other side of the hill and the rabid occultists sprinting down the beach. There's a Foundation destroyer packed 3 miles off the beach. You can barely see it, but we know that at any moment they could open up a railgun and turn us into a red smear on the sand." Adam rocked back and forth with giddy excitement. "So what did you do?" Calvin made another grand gesture. "What do you think? I unclipped my rifle and mowed 'em down, every last one, all fire and hot lead and fury, until the beach was empty and our evac arrived." The young man's eyes were nearly bright enough to illuminate the dark room. "Holy shit, dude! Why haven't you told me this before?" "Because it's bull," Olivia said, walking into the room and setting down scavenged food from the kitchens. "What your glorious leader has failed to mention is that he had lost his gun before we ever got on the beach. He dropped it when one of the native kids threw a rock at him while we were riding down the main road about 3 towns away. In lieu of a Rambo-style shootout," she said, smiling at Calvin as he simmered across the room, "I glamored us up a big sea turtle, and we hid underneath it until the peacekeepers had moved on and the occultists got bored. Then we swam out to the sandbar where our rendezvous was waiting in a fishing boat." She poked a finger towards Calvin. "And I wouldn't call that glorified dinghy a Foundation destroyer. It was barely a patrol ship." "You know," he said, glowering, "there's something to be said about the victors getting to write history." "I know," she said, grinning. "I just did." Adam laughed. "I didn't realize you two had known each other so long. Have you worked together for a while?" "A while?" Olivia spat. "How old do you think I am?" Adam's foot promptly ran itself a mile down his throat, and Olivia laughed again. "Yes," she said. "It's been a while. We first met... when? In Budapest? That would have been in 94. "Too long," Calvin squawked, taking a drink from a metal flask. "Ever since I had to pull her ass off the street when she was running with that group of art monkeys." "Excuse me?" she said, smacking the back of his hand with a wooden spoon. "Those art monkeys were how I got my foot in the door here. The great Calvin Lucian would have had no interest in me if I couldn't do magic." "I don't have any interest in you now," he said, earning himself another smack. "Hang on, magic? Like you're a wizard?" Adam said with renewed awe. "How did I not know this?" "I don't make a habit of talking about it in public," Olivia said, stirring her soup. "But yes, once upon a time I was the incredible Ivory, and an artist of some renown. I worked a couple of shows in Paris and Munich before our cell got busted by Foundation thugs. We got scattered, and the insurgency moved in to pick up the pieces." She eyed Calvin again. "In Budapest." He shrugged. "I've cleaned up plenty of the Foundation's messes in my day. They all sort of run together after a while." As another deft smack rang through the ruined hall they had made their camp in, Anthony shuffled around a corner holding a stack of books. He grunted as he tossed them to the ground in front of the group and gave them a nudge with his foot. "All right, homework time." Olivia scowled. "We haven't even finished dinner yet. You don't think we have time for a single night off? We haven't stopped in weeks." Anthony grabbed a book off the top of the pile and settled into a large chair. "Suit yourself, but remember that the overseers aren't taking the night off." They each grudgingly picked up a book and began to flip through them. After quickly skimming a couple of pages, Adam paused. "Anthony," he said, "what about you? You've been around for a while, right?" Anthony grunted a response. "How long is that exactly?" Adam inquired. Anthony sighed and set the book down on the table next to his chair. "I have the distinct benefit of being the elder member of this group by far. That's all you need to know." Adam scowled. "Come on, man. We've been working together for months now, and I feel like I don't know anything about you." Calvin coughed. "He's just mad because he doesn't want to tell you how old he is." He flipped a page. "Here's a hint. It's pretty old." Anthony glared at him. "At my age, kid, you don't think so much about the things you've done, and start thinking more about the things you could have done." He grunted. "That list is pretty long." "I mean, we all knew what we signed up for, right?" Adam said in between bites of a sandwich. "Our lives in service to a better world, our lives as sacrifice in order to create a future for the rest of mankind." He swallowed. "That doesn't sound too bad." Anthony stared into his book. "You say that now. You're young. The goal isn't too far away from where you're at now. When it's done, you get to go back. But me and some of the others, this is all it's ever been. I knew what I signed up for, You're right in thinking we all did. I'm not ashamed of it. It's just a bittersweet satisfaction you get from it." Calvin elbowed Adam. "Listen, kid, don't let him get you down. We'll probably all be curmudgeons when we get to be as old as he is. But carrying on the engineer's legacy, standing in opposition to..." Anthony snorted. "The engineer, I'm sure." They all stopped and looked at the old man, who shook his head slowly. "Feel free to call it whatever you want, but don't call it carrying on the engineer's legacy." Calvin raised a single eyebrow. "You have a better way to describe keeping the torch of our founder?" Anthony put the book down again and closed his eyes. "The engineer is a lie. The Delta Command tells the insurgency to keep everyone in line. Do it for his legacy, they say. No, do it for your friends and family. Do it because it's the right thing to do. But don't do it for some asinine notion that you're keeping up a man's legacy." "What are you talking about?" Olivia said. Anthony leaned back in his chair. "They'll tell you a lot of things about the engineer. Some of them are true. He certainly did build the insurgency from almost nothing. He set forth many of its tenets. But he also turned traitor the moment he had a chance to grab power." Adam sat up quickly and Calvin glared at the old man. "What are you even talking about?" he barked. "You act like you knew the man." He paused. "I did know him," Anthony growled back. "I followed him during the defection. I carried the weight of our young insurgency right beside him, and I was left to pick up the pieces when he stabbed us in the back and bolted for the Foundation the moment he got a better deal, when they made him an overseer." "That's impossible," Adam said slowly. If you knew the engineer, you would have to be 100 years old, older even than that." Anthony didn't move. "Yes," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Older even than that." Calvin laughed mockingly. "Isn't that something, then? Rail against the unnatural while dipping your hand in that same honeypot to extend your life?" Anthony glowered at him. "I was a child. I knew nothing. I've grown up, but that shit doesn't just leave you." "Who knows about this?" Olivia said quietly. "Nobody." Anthony rubbed his palm against his temple. "Nobody needs to. Every time somebody becomes suspicious, I would disappear for a while and come back with a different name. Even then, in those times, I would be gone. I wasn't ever far away, just enough to snuff out suspicion while still doing
what I could to protect our ambitions. Calvin threw up his hands. So let me get this straight. You expect us to believe that you, someone who has anomalously extended their life past what is natural and who knows what else, you expect us to believe that you now know better than the engineer? Everything we have here is owed to the engineer and the sacrifices he made. Our entire doctrine is... Sacrifices? Anthony was standing now, his face reddening. You think he made sacrifices? He let others do the sacrificing for him. He lost nothing and gained everything he ever wanted. And we all fell for it. Fell for it because we were idealists, Calvin. We believed we could single-handedly stand against the darkness, that our actions would make a difference. The engineer took that idealism, used it for as long as it was useful to him, and then broke its back. Adam moved to speak, but Anthony couldn't be deterred. We built this insurgency from the ground up together, and we shared everything. He took that knowledge back to the Foundation and used it to ruin us. Hundreds were killed, thousands. He knew everything there was to know about us, our facilities, our encampments, our storehouses. He knew it all, and he destroyed it all. We became a joke to them. He sank back into his chair. We set up Delta in the wake of his betrayal to be purposefully realistic. That's why the insurgency has no real goal. The sumo modus operandi is the only goal. And until now, it has been an unattainable one. This is by design. Give us something to do until an opportunity presents itself, or forever be the wriggling doubt in the back of his mind, if he's even still in there. He paused to take a drink. His expression softened. He looked tired. Delta doesn't even know. It wouldn't matter, even if they did. It benefits them to maintain the cult of personality based around him. He's a mascot at this point, and one our organization needs desperately. If what you're saying is true, Calvin said with measured words, then why haven't you said anything sooner? Anthony shrugged. To what end? A chance that people believe me and lose faith in the insurgency, or a greater chance they don't believe me at all, like what you're doing now. What difference would it make? He paused. Our goal is still the most important thing. Anything that would distract from that goal cannot be allowed. So why are you telling us now? Olivia said softly. Anthony didn't speak right away. He brought a single finger up to his temple and began to rub it slowly, closing one eye and looking off somewhere in the distance. I'm telling you now because it matters to me that you know. It would be nothing short of a miracle for us all to make it through this. It doesn't seem right to let someone die without knowing the truth of what they're dying for. We do what we do because the natural order demands we correct our mistakes, not because of what some traitor said to do 70 years ago. He stood, book in hand, and began to walk away. Find whatever peace you can in that. Later, after Olivia and Adam had fallen asleep by their stack of burning furniture, Calvin sat awake. He rolled a vial of liquid back and forth in his hand, his eyes fixed on it. The light of the fire danced across its surface, reds and yellows scattered across a field of sparkling blue. It was cool to the touch. It always had been, and holding it in his hand made him feel calm. He couldn't explain it, but there was something comforting about, "Where did you get that, Calvin?" It wasn't voiced like a question. Calvin spun quickly to find Anthony standing a few paces behind him, face only partially illuminated by the light of the moon. Calvin tucked the vial into his pocket. "It's none of your business," he said quietly. Anthony snorted. "It's absolutely my business, because last I checked there wasn't any of it left." He came forward out of the dark and took a seat on the ground next to Calvin. He was whittling at a stick with a short knife. "Do you know what it is?" Calvin nodded. "It's water from the fountain of life." Anthony cocked his head, peering down at the end of the stick. "That it is. I imagine you have already used another vial to help bring poor Dr. Carter to a long-awaited grave." Calvin nodded. "Yet here you are with another one. Now that is something, isn't it?" He set the knife and stick down and leaned back against a chair. "When they ran the fountain dry, there was just enough water left for 12 vials. Each of them had already drank from it and had their eternal youth assured, but these extra 12 vials were given to each of them, just in case. Last I had heard, they had all been consumed, but now you have 2. I wonder, whose you ended up with? He paused. What are you going to do with it? Nothing, Calvin said quickly. Destroy it, eventually. Calvin closed his eyes. Good. There's nothing in that bottle but poison, take my word for it. It'll clean up your wounds and restore your youth, but the life you lead afterwards is a shallow one, an empty one. You start to lose the taste of things, the colour starts to come out of the sky. So you really have tasted the waters, Calvin said, something like incredulity betraying his words. Anthony sighed. Yes, when we defected, we took vials of water from the fountain for ourselves. Not all of us, but a few. I was one of the lucky ones. He laughed. Lucky? No, not lucky. Once I realized what it was that I had done, I spent years trying to find a way to undo it. The steps I've taken haven't brought back my taste or brightened my eyes, but they have made me start aging again. Slowly. Calvin pulled the vial back out and looked at it for a moment. When he turned back to Anthony, the man was looking at him. Back at the chateau, when Donna Taylor said you were lying about being afraid of death, what do you think she meant by that? Anthony asked. Calvin shrugged. I don't know. I'm really not. He paused. Well, I don't know. I'm not afraid of dying myself, but when I think about losing people, the ones I'm close to, or the ones who look up to me for guidance, something about that makes me feel sick. Of course it does, Anthony said, smiling. There's nothing wrong with being afraid of death, Calvin. It's the great unknown, and the fear of losing people to it has driven greater men to worse evils. Trust me, even I've succumbed to that fear before. He stopped for a moment, staring now at the edge of his knife blade. The difference between us and the Foundation is that we can accept death's role in the natural order, as we can accept the natural order for what it is. The Foundation contains these monsters and miracles and researches them in the hopes of finding greater truths, all for the benefit of the overseers. They claim to want to keep the power of gods out of the wrong hands, so they keep it for themselves. We deny the power of the gods at all. He clicked his tongue against his teeth. It shouldn't exist, Calvin. Not like this. Our world wasn't made to sustain it. Anthony looked back down at the vial. The decision is yours, Calvin, but if I were you, I would destroy it, and never think of it again, because I won't let you use it, and I don't want to kill you. I won't let you make the same mistake he made. Calvin didn't look up at him. You said you've come and gone over the years, that you've used different names. Who are you? Anthony smiled. For you, right now, I'm Anthony Wright. I've been other people before, but all of those people died when I passed to the next name. The man I was when we defected hasn't been alive in decades. With that, Anthony turned over onto his side and within moments was quietly snoring from under his jacket. Calvin persisted a while longer until he too was taken by sleep. Back. Journal entry, the 8th Overseer. The 8th Overseer. Baron Lehman Hoadley, the man who is almost certainly 058, was a turn-of-the-century American industrialist who, together with his brother Garrison, founded the B.G. Hoadley Group, a holdings company that ran several large-scale mining operations across the southern United States and in Mexico. Additionally, the company was one of the first to lay rail lines from Mexico City to San Antonio, making it immensely profitable and inadvertently founding the B.G. Hoadley Rail Line. I mention this because I have little doubt that without the assets of Baron and his brother, the early Foundation would have been snuffed out in its infancy by larger groups such as the Allied Occult Initiative or the Church of the Broken God, which was very active at the time and posed a significant existential threat to the Foundation for years. However, due to the resources available as a result of the Hoadley's enterprises, it managed to overcome those hardships and it emerged as powerful an organization as there exists in the world. While Garrison was busy running their company, Baron was busying himself with running the Foundation. As I understand it, there was a long period of time after the first overseers were chosen that the first overseer did not appear publicly despite his acting as the overseer's overseer. In his absence, Baron used his influence to shape many of the Foundation's policies and investments, including the creating of several sites in the United States and Mexico. It is believed that many of those sites were used to funnel artifacts to the agents of Marshall, Carter, and Dark, and that Baron was receiving kickbacks under the table. However, his unopposed status as de facto leader of the Council would not last forever. Sometime after the end of World War II, a train carrying Garrison Hoadley and several other wealthy investors crashed on its way across the Rio Grande, killing nearly everyone aboard and leaving Baron to pick up the pieces. He quickly found that much of his wealth was tied up in assets that were left to the B.G. Hoadley Group, where he could hide from the overseers and his debt collectors, and then promptly disappeared from active participation in the Council's matters. I received from a close colleague a collection of Council voting logs, all of which register votes for 058. This is likely how he retained his position on the Council, though I personally believe it was much more likely that 057 had simply not gotten around to killing him yet. Either way, Baron Hoadley now bears the title of the Lesser, and while he resides in a near impregnable fortress, he is likely the least formidable of the overseers. His cowardice is almost legendary, with 056 reportedly having once called him the most unpleasantly foul yellowbelly to ever have a seat at the table. Contained in the back of this journal is a map leading to his estate. I have observed it on several occasions, closely watching it for any signs of 058's coming and going. Suffice to say, he is clearly not eager to leave the safety of his fortress, and I believe that the other overseers are just as happy to leave him there to rot.